Have you heard the joke where one spouse said to the other, "Honey, why do you worry all the time when it doesn't do any good?" And the other spouse responded, "What are you talking about? Of course it does good. 90% of the things I worry about do not happen." We live in anxious times, don't we? Many people talk about the uncertainties that we've been facing this year. An anxiety that comes from uncertainty can be contagious. One person worrying can lead to many people worrying. Many times we look for peace by changing our external circumstances. If only we think that were to change, we would be at peace. But what if you cannot change your external circumstances? What if you have no control really over the things that you're going through? What if you cannot immediately change the suffering you are enduring, physically, emotionally, mentally? What if you cannot immediately change the troubles your family is enduring, or the circumstances in the world in which you live? Is it possible to be at peace when you're dealing with things like that? And if so, how do you find that peace? We're in the season of Advent, the season leading up to Christmas, and today is the second Sunday. Last week we started to look at the gifts that God can give to us this season. Last week we looked at the gift of hope, and today we look at the gift of peace. Peace. You know, the truth is human beings have always wrestled with uncertainty and anxiety ever since we've been around. And that's one of the reasons why something that happened 2,000 years ago is still relevant, so relevant for us today. Back then, God's people, all people, were living in uncertain circumstances. People had no guarantee of a comfortable future. Many of the babies who were born died pretty early. People were far from God, and people lived lives of brokenness and of sin. And if you were of the Jewish people, the Roman authorities ruled oppressively with an iron fist, and you did not know what would happen to you in the future. And yet there were those who found peace in the midst of uncertainties like that. And my hope is that you also would have peace in the Advent season and beyond. But not only that you would have peace, but that once having it, you would give peace also. Because I found that just like anxiety is contagious, peace can be contagious as well. One person at peace can help other people be at peace, even when we're all surrounded by uncertainty. So what I want to do today is I want to share with you a few thoughts that I had as I reflected on this passage we read. Thoughts about how we might find peace in uncertain circumstances, and I hope it's all encouraging for you today. The first reflection I have that can help us have and give peace is that God is bringing together a great work in our uncertainties. We read in the passage today that in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee. I want you to focus on that statement, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God. The angel Gabriel was the one who told Elizabeth's husband Zechariah that they would have a son, even though they'd never been able to have a child, and they were too old for it to happen. And then Elizabeth became pregnant. So now we see that in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel goes to announce to Mary that she's going to conceive as a virgin. What we see here is that Elizabeth's story is connected to Mary's story. And we only get this in retrospect. It's something we know because this guy, Luke, who wrote this down, did the research, heard the testimonies, exhaustively went around looking to ascertain what actually happened. Mary would not have known that Elizabeth would have a child in her old age, at least not before it happened. Elizabeth would never have known that Mary would have a child so miraculously, not before it happened. But even though they did not know, there was somebody who did know. God knew. God connected their two stories. Elizabeth would then give birth to John. Mary would give birth to Jesus. And John would go on to point everybody to Jesus Christ. In the midst of all the anxieties of what was to happen in the world, in the midst of Elizabeth, Zechariah, Mary, and Joseph wondering, how is my life going to go? How is this pregnancy going to go? How are these children going to grow up? God is bringing together a great work, his greatest work, in the midst of their uncertainties. I believe the same is true in our lives today, although there may be so much uncertainty in our lives. How the economy is going to go, how long we're going to be wearing masks, how our children will turn out in the future, how our grandchildren will. What will be the outcome of the sufferings we endure? Even though we have these uncertainties, we can have peace when we remember that in our uncertainties, God is still bringing about his great work. You might have had the experience of meeting an expert, maybe a financial expert, maybe a medical expert. Before you met them, you had uncertainties about your finances or your physical health. Then you meet them, the expert explains what can be done, what they can do, how you might be able to be better. And even though things have not been fully resolved, even though the future is still not certain, you still leave that office with a little bit of peace, do you not? How much more can we have peace when we remember that God, the expert of experts, is working out his great work in the midst of the troubles that we're facing? I remember one of the missionaries I worked with once told me that they had been praying for a couple of $1,000 because one of the churches that he had planted had this desperate need. The church I was serving at the time had collected offerings to help out missions, and we had no idea what was going on over there. But the amount we collected ended up being exactly the amount that they needed. Unknown to us, God still bringing together a great work. So during Advent, we remember that God brought Elizabeth's story and Mary's story together to bring about this great work of Jesus. And in our uncertain lives, I believe he's doing the same. He's bringing together a great work of his own. And that means we can have peace. The second reflection I had that can help us to have peace and to give peace is that God is present with and works with small people. The passage we read tells us that God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. You know, one scholar wrote that the town of Nazareth was 15 miles away from the Sea of Galilee. It was 6 miles from the closest major road, and it did not have a good water supply. That's the town Jesus grew up in. It was a relatively no-name town off the beaten path. And later on, one of Jesus' disciples would say, when he heard that Jesus was from Nazareth, he would say, "Nazareth? What good can come from that place?" That was Nazareth's reputation. Mary from Nazareth was a relative nobody. Joseph was a king, was a descendant of King David. We're told that. But by Joseph's time, 1,000 years after David, you can imagine David had tons of descendants. And yet it is in these relatively small people that God starts his greatest work. You know, there's an approach to life, an attitude that has overtaken our culture. It propels us towards getting recognition, more views, more likes, more ratings, to stand out amongst others. And while I believe we should always strive for excellence and doing the best we can, the temptation is to find our value and our worth in how many likes we've gotten, in how many views we've gotten, and what our ratings are. And then we equate all of that with God's blessing on our lives. I don't know about you, but that makes me more anxious, less at peace. Because what if we're unknown, not well known? What if we're relatively plain? What if we're not the cream of the crop, top of the class, best of the best? What if you do not stand out amongst others on Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok? What if you cannot celebrate your birthday or Christmas like everybody in the commercials do? Are you worth less? Is God blessing you less? It's a tyranny of prosperity, and it robs us of peace. Advent reminds us that God does some of his greatest work in small places with humble people. The angel did not appear to a princess in a palace in Rome, but to a poor girl in Nazareth in the middle of nowhere. God can do good and great things, not just through those who get all the attention. God is present and working also, sometimes more so, in every person who is looking to him in faith, no matter how humble, no matter how small. You know, when I first moved to Delran a year ago, people I knew who lived and worked in New York City would ask me, so where did you go? Where did you move to? And I would tell them Delran, New Jersey. And I would get this confused look because they would not recognize the name. And then I would explain to him it's a couple hours away. You take 95 South down, and then you get on 295 South, and you get out on exit 34B, and then you go another 5-6 miles, and then you take a left turn at the traffic light, and then you go down, and you take another right turn. And after I was done, their eyes would have glazed over. But I want you to know how blessed I've been by all of you here. I've found God working in his great love in and through our relatively small faith community. I'm so proud and honored to be a part of the church here. And I tell you, it's a great peace to know that God works through humble people. Let's not get caught up in the tyranny of prosperity, of trying to be like everybody else, especially in this season. Let's not get caught up in the snobbery of the popular, trying to be better than others or trying to have what other people have. The third reflection I have that can help us have and give peace is that God works in and through discomfort and uncertainty in our lives. Please hear me. God is not only working when things are going well. In the passage, the angel Gabriel appears to Mary and says this, "Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you." Mary is greatly troubled at his words, wondering what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel says to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus." Gabriel's announcement to Mary, after telling her that she is highly favored, that God is with her, Gabriel's announcement is that she would give birth to a son, even though she's not married. Now, she and Joseph were pledged, not quite married. And at that time, in their culture, pledging is where the couple had made promises of mutual faithfulness. but it was legally binding as well. The wedding would come about a year later. For her to conceive and to bear a child without Joseph's involvement outside of marriage in their culture meant public shame for her for the rest of her life and for her family. At a minimum. And at a maximum, possibly death. And yet, please notice what the angel says. Even though the angel's news carries such implications, the angel says to Mary, you are highly favored. God is with you. You are blessed. Brothers and sisters, if you are a faithful follower of Jesus, the Bible describes you as it describes Mary, that you have favor from God, you are blessed, and God is with you. But as we see with Mary, favor from God does not equal an easy, comfortable life. Favor from God does not mean all your external circumstances are exactly the way you want it. All your ducks are in a row and everything is happening exactly like you thought. Actually, if God is moving, if God is working, if God is a living God, then it means God can make you pretty uncomfortable. If God has never made you uncomfortable, your God's name is not the God of the Bible. Your God's name is comfort. We believe the lie that getting what we want, being externally comfortable, is what leads to peace. If only I can go on a tropical beach somewhere, I'll be fine. All expenses paid. All inclusive, I'll be at peace. But getting what we want, being externally comfortable, is no guarantee of peace. You could be wealthy, healthy, and filled with anxiety and unmet expectations. What if wanting your way and wanting to be comfortable is what is actually stealing your peace? And what if, in order to find the peace that you're really looking for, God has to trouble your life? Like if God were to bring up something unresolved from your past. I don't know about you, but I don't like it when that happens. But if God were to bring it up so that you could let it go, so that you might forgive and be forgiven, and then really be at peace. Or if God were to break your habit or dependency upon something, that's not comfortable. But it's so that you could be at peace without it. Or if God were to give you a vision for something great in your life, like he did with Mary. But the reality is that great vision will make your life difficult for a long time. What if, in order to find the peace that you're really looking for, God had to trouble your life? God does not just make life comfortable for those he favors. God works in and through difficulty and uncertainty in the lives of those he favors, if Mary is any example. And sometimes that difficulty you're facing, that discomfort, that uncertainty is the very evidence that God is working in your life. It is not comfortable to leave your homeland at the age of 75 and to go to a completely foreign country where the cultures are different and the languages are different. God calls Abraham at 75 to leave his home. It is not comfortable To stand in front of a giant twice as tall as you, mocking you, and every indication points to the fact that he's stronger than you and better than you. And to stand with nothing but a sling and a stone in front of a giant with sword and armor. That's not comfortable. It is not comfortable. To carry the news to your family that an angel appeared to you and that you have conceived and will give birth. What do you think her family told her when she told them that? It's not comfortable to tell your husband-to-be, this is what happened to me. Sometimes the difficulty, the uncertainty, the discomfort is the very evidence that God is cooking something up in our lives. And that means when difficulties and uncertainties arise, instead of increasing in anxiety and worry, we can find peace, thinking, you know what, God might be up to something here. Not that God is doing a great work out there in the midst of uncertainties, but God may be up to something in my life personally in the midst of my uncertainties. And if we look at Mary's life as an example, then we see that in everything God is up to do in our lives, what he's doing is he's ultimately bringing more, revealing more of his love in Jesus Christ to you and through you to others. How would it change your perspective if you started to think and started to look for what God might be up to in the discomforts that you're feeling? Brothers and sisters, the key to finding peace in our lives, even when we cannot change our circumstances, I believe, is in surrendering to God and trusting his word. That is how I see Mary finding peace in the midst of everything that was going on. When the angel Gabriel gave that announcement to Mary, she says this, "How will this be, since I'm a virgin?" And the angel answers, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month, for no word from God will ever fail." And Mary responds, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." Mary asked, "How will?" And the angel answered, "God will." If we keep saying, "How will?" our anxiety grows. But if we say God will, then our peace can grow. And after hearing God will, Mary surrenders, saying, "Okay, I am your servant, God. May your word to me be fulfilled." Genuine peace does not come from changing your circumstances. Genuine peace, no matter what the circumstances are, comes from surrender. And not surrendering to some impersonal force out there, like, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. This too shall pass. No, genuine peace comes from a personal surrender to God. Having faith that God is bringing about some great thing, that's a kind of surrender. Why? Because you're giving up your expectations of what you want to see happen for what God will do. Not chasing popularity, prosperity, views, likes, ratings. That is a kind of surrender. Why? Because you're giving up chasing what the rest of the world chases for what God will do. And allowing God to trouble your life and not just bring you comfort, that is a kind of surrender, because you're giving up even your own sense of comfort for what God will do. These are the surrenderings of faith to God which say, In effect, God, I believe in the midst of these circumstances, I still believe you are good. I still believe in the midst of discomfort and uncertainty, even though I do not understand fully what's going on, I still believe you're with me and you're working out something good in and through my life. It is that surrender to God that I believe leads to great peace. And I invite you today to consider where God is asking you, calling you to surrender. If you're not a Christian, you're not a follower of Jesus, or your faith has gone cold, I invite you to surrender your heart and your life to God. Maybe you've tried all sorts of other things to bring you peace. Food, vacation, activity, entertainment, distraction. And it takes your mind off things for a while, but as soon as you're back in the thick of things, you have no peace. What you're looking for is surrendering your life to God and letting God rule your heart and your life. God loves you. He gave his son Jesus for you. And just like Mary was a virgin and yet took on the shame of having a baby out of wedlock, so Jesus, pure of any sin, took on your sin and my sin on the cross. He died and rose from the dead so we could be forgiven, set free, and live closely with him at peace forever and ever, and to help others to do the same. So I invite you, wherever you are today, to surrender your life and heart to Jesus. If you are a follower of Jesus, and you have been for a while, but you've been filled with anxiety and worry coming from the uncertainty of our times, then I invite you to surrender your heart and life to God as well. What does that look like practically? Well, first of all, it looks like whenever you're anxious, committing your anxieties to God in prayer. Actually talking with God about them. Not trying to prove to anybody that you're having it all together, you're holding it all together, and you're at peace. But no, going straight to God and saying, God, I'm anxious. Philippians 4:6-7, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Give your anxieties to God in exchange for his peace. Recognize your anxieties when you're in a crazy situation, when you're stuck in traffic, when you're overwhelmed with things to do. Go straight to God and say, God, I'm so anxious. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm late and I'm stuck in traffic. But thank you. Thank you that you're still with me. Thank you for everything you're doing in my life. Thank you for slowing me down even through this traffic to pay attention to you. And God will give you his peace. That's his promise. If God can create life supernaturally in a young woman, God can give you peace. If God has spoken it, it's possible. Second, surrender looks like asking God to bring about his purpose in your life. As a parent, one of the things you wonder is what your child is going to end up being. Can you imagine the comfort and peace Mary had to sustain her when the angel told her what the child's purpose was going to be? Pray for God's purpose in your life and for those whom you love. The greatest peace, I think, is to know that whatever is going on, you're walking in the purposes of God. And finally, surrender looks like obeying the next step of faith that God is pointing out to you. Like Mary said, okay, I'm your servant, God. May your word to me be fulfilled. What step of faith is God calling you to take in obedience to him? These kinds of surrender to God, I believe, leads to his peace. But once you find peace in God's presence and good purpose, share that peace with others. Be a person of contagious peace this season. And one way you can do that is to voice your gratefulness and appreciation for other people. Everybody's so wound up tight this season, right? It's always been that way. But a voice that says to you in the midst of this season, thank you so much for what you're doing. You look so beautiful today. You did such a good job dealing with that situation. That kind of gratefulness and appreciation, doesn't that bring peace? You know, I was having a rough day one day, and somebody said to me, "Ooh, I like your tie. That's a nice tie." And my stress level went down from 90% to 50% from that one comment. Maybe it's because I'm self-conscious about the way I look. I don't know. But just one comment of appreciation, one comment of thoughtfulness can bring such peace to a person's day. I close with this. John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist faith, and early on in his life, he was on a ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean. A terrible storm came up, tore apart the mainsail, the water flooded the ship, and everybody's screaming. Everybody's terrified, except for a group of German Moravian missionaries. You know what they were doing? They were singing in the middle of the storm. John Wesley was so taken by this, later on he would write in his journal that it was the most glorious day he had had up to that point. Scholars suggest that later on, when he put his faith in Jesus alone for his salvation, for his forgiveness, that his encounter with those singing Moravian missionaries had something to do with it. That there were people out there in the midst of a storm, in the midst of such uncertainty, whether they will live or die, would be able to be at peace singing. And of course, Wesley would go on to lead a movement of God that continues today. And what if we were all to find peace? And what if we were all to give that peace just like these Moravians did? I think we might not just have peace in ourselves, but we'd be able to give that peace to others. Something the world sorely needs in this season. This Advent, I hope you would receive that peace from God through your surrender to him and give that peace to him, or give that peace in God to others as well.